Lila Moreno had always been a believer in love, in grit, in second chances. When she first met Adrian Blackwell, he was all sharp cheekbones and sharper ambition, a man fueled by ideas and caffeine, but short on everything else. They scraped by together in a cramped walk-up where the oven tilted slightly and the bathroom door stuck when it rained. Mornings were a choreography of survival. Adrian at the stove, coaxing eggs not to burn while Lila snagged her worn tote and a paper cup of coffee, their quiet minutes before the city roared to life. She'd steadied him through the years when his small manufacturing startup swayed on the lip of failure. When bills collected like snowdrifts on their table, she leaned in, not away running payroll when the bookkeeper quit, negotiating with suppliers, soothing irate customers at midnight. Their life was held together by duct tape, optimism, and a pact they never had to say out loud. We're in this together. 7 years. That was how long they built a future out of late nights and faith, and then fate hit like a thunderclap. Adrian's estranged father died, and a letter arrived. Lila was in their scuffed kitchen, morning sun puddling across the chipped linoleum, when the door flew open and Adrian stumbled in, breathless and pale. "My father left me everything," he said, voice shaking. $33 million. The number bloomed in Lila's mind like fireworks. For a heartbeat, she saw it all: the home, with windows that caught the afternoon light, the children they'd once whispered about, the freedom to dream without checking the balance first. She reached for him, smiling. But Adrian's smile had an edge now, polished and distant. It grew colder by dinner. He pushed his food around like it offended him, gaze sliding past her as if she were a memory he was trying to place. "I'm done with all this," he said suddenly. "The grinding, the scraping. Those years were a waste." Lila blinked. A waste? He looked up, something cruel flickering in his eyes. "You held me back." The words landed like a fist. "Adrian," she said softly, "I stood by you." He laughed, a small, sour sound. "You were dead weight. I don't need you anymore." By morning, a suitcase waited by the door. He handed it to her without meeting her eyes. The latch clicked behind her, and Lila stood on the porch with autumn wind tugging at her coat, the world abruptly made of sharp edges. She walked away on shaking legs. The ache in her chest was a cavern, but beneath the ache, a pilot light caught, and it did not go out. She found herself in the office of Mara Chen, a lawyer with careful eyes and a reputation for making bullies regret their assumptions. The room hummed with the air conditioner. A clock ticked with judicial certainty. Papers sprawled across the desk, bank statements, contracts, emails, and a heavy envelope stamped "Last Will and Testament." "Adrian didn't expect a fight," Mara said, thumbing through the will. "He figured the money buys your silence." "He figured wrong," Lila said, voice steady even as her hands tightened in her lap. For years, Lila had been more than a supportive spouse. She had been the spine of Adrian's business. She remembered the winter it almost collapsed Adrian sitting on their sagging couch, head in his hands, invoices like a paper avalanche. "We'll never make payroll," he'd whispered. Lila had set a cup of coffee by his elbow and phoned the investor she'd coaxed to the table, talked through cash flow until her throat went raw, and kept the company afloat by sheer force of will and arithmetic. Now. Mara slid a page across the desk and tapped near the bottom. "Here," she said, "a conditional clause." Lila leaned in. The language was dry and spare. "The inheritance shall be granted to the sole heir only upon the condition that all legal and marital obligations are upheld at the time of inheritance." "What does that mean?" Lila asked. "It means," Mara said, mouth tipping wryly, "Adrian doesn't get to cut you loose the same day he cashes in. Marital obligations are not a menu he can ignore. If he tried to dispose of you like a receipt, he may have breached the terms." Lila's pulse quickened. "So we have leverage." "We have a case," Mara said, "but we'll need proof of your contributions, of joint assets, of his attempt to ice you out." So Lila did what she'd always done. She worked. They compiled emails where Adrian shut down her passwords, bank logs showing funds shuttled out of joint accounts without consent, voicemails where he dismissed her as irrelevant the same night he moved money into a private brokerage, vendor statements naming Lila as the contact when the business wobbled, photos of ledgers in her handwriting, past due notices she'd negotiated into payment plans, each piece of paper a stitch, each stitch closing a wound. On the morning of the hearing, the courthouse rose out of the heat like a stone ship. Its steps gleamed, its columns threw clean shadows. Lila's heels clicked like a metronome as she climbed. She squared her shoulders and followed Mara through metal detectors and echoing halls into a courtroom already swollen with reporters and spectators hungry for scandal. Adrian lounged at counsel table in a suit that looked poured onto him, his grin thin as a knife. He didn't look at her. When the judge entered, the air shifted. Mara stood first. Her tone was calm, measured, inexorable. "Your Honor, we will demonstrate that Mr. Blackwell sought to deprive Miss Moreno of her lawful marital share, and, in doing so, violated the express terms of the testamentary instrument that granted him his inheritance." Adrian leaned toward the microphone, disdain curling his lip. "She's after the money, that's all. She never mattered until the number had a dollar sign." Lila held her breath, then let it go. When Mara called her to the stand, she spoke without adornment. She told the court about the nights of inventory under flickering lights, about reconciling accounts at 2 a.m, about the investor she'd courted and the client she'd persuaded not to walk. She described the winter she'd nursed Adrian's ailing mother, running from hospital to warehouse and back again. She did not cry. She did not have to. The truth sat between her and the judge like something solid. Mara introduced the will. The crucial clause landed like a gavel stroke. The inheritance is contingent upon honoring all legal and marital obligations at the time of inheritance. She walked the court through a neat chronology: the date of death, the date of the notification, the timestamps on Adrian's emails revoking access, the locked accounts, the unilateral transfer of funds, exhibit after exhibit. The room grew still except for the soft scrape of pens. Objections rose and fell. Mara did not flinch. Adrian's confidence frayed in increments, a tightening jaw, a glance that skittered, a whisper to his attorney that tasted of desperation. At last, the judge spoke, voice even as stone. "The record reflects that Mr. Blackwell, upon learning of his father's bequest, immediately took steps to exclude Miss Moreno from marital assets and obligations, in violation of the condition precedent described in the will. This conduct constitutes a breach of the inheritance terms." The courtroom held its breath. Accordingly, the judge finished, the court awards Miss Moreno 50% of the $33 million inheritance, plus damages for emotional distress and financial disruption. Sound drained out of the room and then returned in a rush, the strobe of camera shutters, the rustle of fabric, someone's muffled gasp. Adrian's face went chalky. Lila sat very still, hands folded in her lap, and let the verdict wash through her like light. Afterward, in the echoing corridor, Adrian approached. For the first time since the letter, he looked unsure of himself. "Lila," he said, voice hoarse. "I was wrong. I got scared. I never meant—" "You did mean it," she said gently. "That's why it hurt." She wasn't angry anymore. She was done. Months later, a blue ribbon stretched across the entrance to the Mariah Foundation named after Lila's grandmother, who cleaned offices at night and stitched dreams by day. Lila stood with a pair of silver scissors and a crowd of women who had lost homes, marriages, jobs, the scaffolding of their lives. The foundation offered grants, legal assistance, and business mentorship for women rebuilding after betrayal and financial abuse. Reporters jostled for quotes, a microphone tilted toward her. "Is this revenge?" someone asked. Lila smiled, steady and sure. "It's not revenge," she said. "It's restoration. It's what happens when you remember your worth and refuse to be erased." Inside, a wall displayed framed notes from donors and small businesses she'd helped keep afloat. Across the street, at a cafe window, Adrian sat alone, staring at nothing. Lila thought of the years she'd spent believing in him and did not regret them. Belief had taught her how to build. Survival had taught her whom to build for. When the ribbon fell and applause rose, she felt the old pilot light become a bright, unwavering flame. She'd not been dead weight. She'd been ballast steadying necessary. In the wreckage of what he tried to throw away, she had found the parts of herself that could lift a life. And this time, the future would be one she chose.